Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you are doing well. Before we kick off today's event, please allow me to introduce myself. I am Valerie Williams, Director of the Office of Special Education Programs in the U.S. Department of Education, and I am extremely excited to speak with you today. In support of Secretary Cardona's mission to improve equity across our nation's schools, I am pleased to announce a new initiative to improve post-secondary outcomes for youth with disabilities. Expect, engage, and empower successful transitions for all. This initiative will provide an opportunity for the field to join OSEP in the challenge to raise expectations, engage families earlier, and empower all who support transition services to improve post-school outcomes for children and youth with disabilities and their families. This is a call to action to transform how we see, plan, and implement secondary transition services to advance educational equity, excellence, and post-school outcomes for our nation's youth with disabilities. Every family that has an infant, child, or youth identified with a disability needs to be exposed to high expectations from the beginning. They're entitled to a comprehensive, rigorous education with appropriate conditions for learning that ensures they have a successful pathway to their lives beyond high school. If we want to improve post-secondary outcomes, it is critical to begin transition planning earlier to engage and empower youth with disabilities and their families to access the appropriate transition services needed. Today, I speak to you not only as the OSEP director, but as the parent of a child with Down syndrome. I connect with secondary transition as an active member of my local disability community and as a parent, even though my son is well under the age of formal transition planning. From my perspective, every part of education, every specialized instructional practice, related service, curricular standard, content, and access to inclusive general education leads, connects, and builds toward the purpose of readying children with disabilities for lifelong success. For our children, we focus on specific individualized educational goals within an IEP, but those goals should be informed by the long-term view of post-secondary life, including education and employment. I have the expectation that my child will attend college, and he's engaged, as he's already told me he wants to attend and to start visiting colleges. I have that expectation for him just as my parents expected my sister and I to do the same. If he ultimately decides to take a different path and become an entrepreneur or take up a trade or even have a career in the federal government, that's perfectly fine. What's important is that he has been empowered to create a life of fulfillment and productivity. This can only truly happen when our systems collaborate and partner in the best individual interests of each youth with a disability. As family members, IEP teams, and adult agencies that work with young adults with disabilities, we need to begin with the end in mind, allowing for flexibility along the way. Let's make it a regular practice to ask our children, and by extension their families, what their post-secondary aspirations and goals may be. There may not be a fully fleshed out plan, but there's value in planting the seed and beginning the conversation, particularly at younger ages. As young adults prepare to move from school to post-secondary education, community living, and competitive integrated employment, effective transition planning can help them become independent, productive adults. Beginning at the earliest ages, it becomes imperative to align current levels of performance and functioning with high expectations for future possible successes and achievements. Identifying the challenges children and youth will face as adults and preparing and assisting them to meet those demands successfully requires careful transition planning. It is important to begin the transition planning process early to allow time for not only planning, but accessing the support services needed in the future. We can and must raise our expectations beyond the young adult just getting by academically, functionally, and leaving school. Why is having high expectations so important, you might ask yourself? It's important because high expectations lead to positive transition outcomes. Research has shown that families of youth with disabilities who maintain higher expectations will see their child achieve greater academic success. Additionally, several studies have found that students recognize when teachers hold high expectations for them and perform better academically when educators do so. Higher academic achievement is tied to better outcomes in post-secondary education, employment, and financial self-sufficiency. Youth with high expectations may have more educational options and better paying jobs that match their abilities and interests. Together, we can help all students, including children with disabilities, achieve their potential and lead fulfilling, productive lives. OSEP and I expect that every part of education, from instructional practices to related services to curricular standards and beyond, is critical to the seamless delivery of high-quality IDEA transition services that engages and empowers youth with disabilities for lifelong success. Such seamless delivery relies on the collaboration between educators, vocational rehabilitation, and other adult service agencies with authentic engagement of youth and families. This initiative is an opportunity to bring together critical stakeholders to explore potential strategies and innovative approaches to address transition for children and youth with disabilities. We plan to dialogue with the field to uncover what's working well and what can be improved. This initiative is not isolated to the secondary transition specialists or even the secondary educators and providers. I'm hearing and seeing promising practices and programs related to transition, and my goal is for those to not be islands of excellence, but commonplace. OSEP will be providing opportunities to highlight these practices, as well as how to scale up these practices for maximum impact. Now, let's dive into the focus areas of this initiative, or the 3 E's: expect, empower, and engage. Under expect, we are discussing educating teachers, service providers, and families on secondary transition requirements and high-quality implementation of special education, related services, and supplementary aids and services, starting upon the child's identification with disability and intensifying throughout childhood and elementary school as appropriate for each child. Under engage, we're discussing families acquiring the knowledge and skills necessary to effectively engage in planning that leads to the development of realistic yet high expectations for their children and youth, and teachers and service providers offering and supporting challenging objectives for them, so that we will consequently be able to empower them, empowering our children, our youth, and our families so that they can navigate school and community services and successfully transition to post-secondary education, independent living, and competitive integrated employment opportunities. It's critical that we acknowledge that secondary transition not fall under special education in isolation at any level. Rather, it's a process that cannot succeed without effective collaboration and the seamless provision of services. Successful collaborations are the result of positive relationships built through activities such as timely referrals, participation in transition and pre-employment transition services planning, IEP meetings, back-to-school nights, and information sessions. At the federal level, successful secondary transition requires the collaboration between us and OSEP and our colleagues in other federal agencies such as Labor and HHS who work with adults with disabilities, and most certainly with our partners within OSERS, the Rehabilitative Services Administration, or RSA. I'm now pleased to introduce Suzanne Mitchell, Chief of RSA's Vocational Rehabilitation Program Unit, who will further describe our partnership, including funding and our ongoing collaboration throughout the initiative.
Thank you, Valerie. I'm Suzanne Mitchell. I'm the Chief of the Vocational Rehabilitation Program Unit in the Rehabilitation Services Administration. On behalf of our RSA Deputy Commissioner, Carol Doback, I want to express our excitement for the partnership with our colleagues in OSEP in this transition initiative As someone who was born blind, I have traveled the road that many of you are negotiating, or who, as professionals, are assisting individuals with disabilities to negotiate. And it is through the development of high expectations on the part of my family and the providers that I came into contact with as I was growing up, as well as my engagement with entities that provided excellent services and resources that were available to me, that I became empowered and gained that empowerment along with the assistance of other mentors with disabilities and those who believed in me, that I am where I am today. I am in a good job, living independently, very self-sufficient, and have raised a family. So I'm proof in the pudding that this kind of collaboration and work on the part of all partners can really succeed for those individuals with disabilities. But those of us at RSA, we are eager to collaborate in this transition initiative to inspire individuals with disabilities, their families, and practitioners to ensure that all individuals with disabilities have every advantage and opportunity to realize their dreams for the future. You know, there's a significant power in our collective action and collaboration, and we need to draw on that power to ensure that the children and youth that we work with have every advantage and succeed in life. I am reminded in my very early work in vocational rehabilitation as a counselor that setting high expectations for the people that I worked with was crucial. And the full engagement of all of the partners available to work with these individuals was so crucial to their success. I worked with an individual who had come to us a little later in life. She was no longer a student in school, but she expressed the experience of working through these collaborative relationships and the setting of high expectations by saying, "You believed in me more than I believed in myself, and now look where I am." And she represents the same sentiment of so many people with disabilities who've had every advantage and opportunity through the collaboration of those who work with them. So as a result, she became employed successfully, lived independently, and every individual with a disability deserves the same opportunity to reach their full potential as human beings. And it's our responsibility as parents, families, and service providers, educators, mentors, whoever, those of us who work with individuals with disabilities, to work collaboratively to support this goal. The Rehabilitation Services Administration provides grants to state vocational rehabilitation agencies, which our RSA oversees, to provide the necessary services and training to individuals with disabilities, including students and youth with disabilities, that will lead to competitive integrated employment and self-sufficiency and independent living. You'll learn more about these services and activities through what we have planned through this transition initiative in the many months ahead. I want to point out just a couple of the specific opportunities that the VR program makes available to students and youth with disabilities. One is called Pre-Employment Transition Services, and this represents a set of services for individuals who are transitioning primarily from secondary to post-secondary education and training and independent living. And we also work with transition services as well for students and youth with disabilities. We work with individuals with the most significant disabilities, as well as those who are classified as having significant disabilities, so that we can help them to have meaningful employment and self-sufficiency as they pursue their independence as adults. More recently, RSA has invested millions of dollars and to fund discretionary projects through the Disability Innovation Fund. And these grants ensure that individuals, including students and youth with disabilities, have every opportunity through strategic partnerships with multiple entities to engage in competitive integrated employment and develop career pathways that will lead to even more advanced careers. On April 5th, 2023, RSA issued a notice inviting applications for the Disability Innovation Fund Pathways to Partnership grants. These model demonstration grants this is, by the way, the largest discretionary grant administered by RSA, with an estimated $224 million in available funds. These grants will fund multiple innovative projects that will demonstrate they'll demonstrate basically how the VR agency, state and local educational agencies, and centers for independent living can work together and focus on the creation of a systemic approach to improve this access to pre-employment transition services and other transition services for students and youth. As young people with disabilities move through the school system, they do not always have the opportunity to or exposure to self-advocacy training or work-based learning experiences and career exploration and independent living training and opportunities. This historical funding opportunity really advances a key goal of the Biden-Harris administration, which is to pave a clear and robust path to independent living and competitive integrated employment for young people, for youth with disabilities as they transition from high school to post-secondary endeavors in adult life. In closing, I would like to say the RSA really looks forward to the ongoing collaboration and participation with OSEP and with all of you throughout this endeavor of our transition initiative. We view the upcoming activities and the symposia that we have planned as a rich investment in the future of children, students, and youth with disabilities. One that can really have an effect on changing, beginning at the earliest ages, the expectations that all of us carry, including individuals with disabilities and their families, for what is possible in the future. We hope through this to lead to opportunities for expanded engagement and employment and the empowerment of families and individuals with disabilities to assist them in maximizing opportunities for success. We are very excited about this opportunity, and I will turn it back to you now, Valerie.
Thank you, Suzanne. I am excited to collaborate with you on this initiative and look forward to the work and events to come. This is very exciting. Now I would like to introduce our first panel today. We will be hearing from families who will share their experiences and expectations for transition for their own children, and we will hear from some of the youth themselves having gone through the process. We'll hear from Nancy Torres-Burling and her son Leo, Sadia Batul, who will be speaking about her daughter Alum, Monica Rouse and her daughter Elizabeth, and Young Sub Bay, who will be speaking about her son Eugene.
Hi, my name is Nancy. I'm the proud mother of Leo.
Hi, my name is Leo. I am 50 years old. I am smart, funny, witty, and confident. I also have autism.
Today, we are going to share some of our family's transition experience. Our story begins with having and keeping high expectations along the way, even in the most difficult of times. We understand the implication of the diagnosis, his strengths, and challenge. We pursue the necessary accommodations for his learning process at school and daily life. We constantly redefine our goals, and we never stop dreaming high.
I remember my parents invited me to dream since I was a little kid. They have asked me to think about what I want to be when I grow up, and they have encouraged me to feel confident about it. My current plan is to become a journalist in the disability or political field.
In addition to high expectations, we have exposed Leo to a wide range of activities and situations in which he can develop new skills. To do this, we have had to learn to manage our fears and welcome mistakes and failures as learning experience.
Dreaming is not enough. Doing things is the way to achieve success. You have to be self-motivated in order to go on with your life. A positive attitude, trying many times and not giving up will help.
Of course, the journey is not easy, and we have encountered many challenges along our way, or let's call it opportunities for improvement, such as developing more training for schools and transition providers so they can better support families, increasing the quantity and quality of post-secondary options for young adults.
And the most critical issues of them all are continue working to accelerate diversity, inclusion, and belonging in our community.
Thank you so
Thank
much
you so much.
for your attention.
Hi, my name is Satya Batul, and I live in Pennsylvania with my husband Syed and my wonderful 9-year-old daughter, Ehlam. She's amazing, artistic, and has a diagnosis of autism and ADHD. My hopes or expectations for my daughter is for her to have a sense of belonging in life and meaningful inclusion at school, home, and in the community. I also hope for her to have independence that also includes financial independence, academic success, love, and also that she's a contributing member of the society. In terms of the concerns about transitions for my daughter or what transition-related challenges we faced, I would say that we've been very fortunate so far to have professionals starting in early intervention infant toddler program, the preschool program, and now in elementary school, that we got professionals who were very supportive during transitions, ensuring timely meetings, answering the many questions we had, and providing us with resources to better prepare for the transitions. As an immigrant parent, I was not very well aware of the special education services in the US, so they really made sure that I had the support that I needed to become a better informed parent. As my daughter will be transitioning to middle school in a few years, I do worry about her, that big transition. Currently, she's in an autistic support program with integration into general ed for specials, recess, lunch, and a social emotional academic development program. And I sometimes worry about her inclusion in middle school. I would like to see more integration into general ed, especially with academics. An inclusion that means meaningful connection with her peers. Currently, we have a behavioral health technician in school for her who plays an instrumental role in her success at school due to the ongoing communication, coordination, and collaboration between the teams at school, the behavioral support services, and us as parents at home. While we are very grateful for this support, I would like to see my daughter be as independent as possible in middle school, as I believe that this will result in her independence in future life. But I do worry if this support is still needed at middle school. Would we have the same incredible support person or the same level of collaboration between the school and the behavioral support teams? In terms of who played key roles in contributing to positive transition opportunities for my child, I would again say that each and every member of our early intervention infant toddler program, early intervention preschool program, the behavioral support team, and most importantly, the autistic support teacher in elementary school played a very important role in making sure that our transitions were smooth. Not only did they have timely meetings, provided us responses to the questions that we had, and also supported us with resources and further information to learn about the transition process. We also had a transition fair from our local intermediate unit where we were able to connect with representatives of different school districts, as well as connect with other families from across the country who were also transitioning into elementary school. I would especially like to mention the State Early Intervention Birth to 5 program, who provided me with numerous learning opportunities, such as a family leadership training called C2P2EI, or Confidence and Competence Partners in Policy Making for Early Intervention Families, and a scholarship to the National Autism Conference, where I was further able to learn about the transition to elementary school, as well as better educate and inform myself on my role as a parent and the leader of the IEP team. These opportunities also helped me to connect with other parents from around the state and to learn from their experiences and have the support that I needed as a parent. In terms of what supports or services do I think should be implemented more widely, I would say from my own experience, as well as connecting with other families in my role as a peer supporter, the most important support families need is information and resources about the transition process, and especially for families that may have additional barriers to accessing information, such as language barriers. When families do not have the adequate information that is needed, they're not able to ask the important questions and thus make informed decisions. I would also emphasize that the goals in the IEP should always have the lens on how this goal is going to help prepare the student for the future independence, inclusion, and success. Currently, with my daughter at school, we are working on a goal on independence and inclusion, and that includes how that will look like in middle school and ultimately when she transitions from school services into that big transition in life, and hopefully will have a career in a life that is full of independence, inclusion, and meaningful relationships for a better and brighter future for her.
Hello, my name is Monica, and this is my daughter Elizabeth, and we are here to talk about transition. And the first thing I guess I'd like to say that I think is super important for me and my framing of transition is that I always thought of transition more of an event. For example, going from 5th grade to 6th grade, or 7th grade, or rather 8th grade to high school. And what I have come to realize over the course of time, as Beth has progressed through the educational system, when she was in PK-12, is that transition is really a process. And what I mean by that is at every grade level that Beth experienced, transition was a part of the conversation at that particular grade level for a variety of reasons. You know, developmentally, as students change, as they go through school, there are certain needs that need to be considered in progression with the IEP and the services that are provided by the IEP. So for me, it was just getting used to the idea of looking at transition as a process. That helped to really change my perspective in terms of what the transitional elements of living, learning, and working mean, and how those elements become parts of the conversation regarding transition. It really helped me focus my attention. It was a very broad perspective in reference to transition. And when I realized the importance of living, learning, and working conversations at each grade level, it really narrowed my focus on transition it broadened my focus of transition in reference to what I should be considering as Beth progressed through the school system. Probably one of the things I also discovered early on in reference to transition was the idea of my fears and what we talk a lot about hopes, what we want for our child in terms of hopes. And a real element of the process is, what are my fears as a parent? And how do I recognize those fears? And how do I keep those fears into perspective? Because sometimes they can be a driving force in conversations. And I was really concerned about, how can I make sure that my fears don't become Beth's fears? And that became very evident in the process of transition, because as her independence grew, so did my fears in a lot of different ways. And I have actually held on to that perspective, even as she went through undergraduate and is now looking at going to law school in the fall. How do I continue to make sure that my fears don't become her fears? Because even though she's quite capable of taking care of herself, that doesn't mean that I don't still experience some anxieties, some worries, and in essence, some fears. One of the things I really also wanted to point out is the importance of the people as members of the IEP team who really helped me view transition from a broader perspective. And that was her vision itinerant, her Braille instructor, and her mobility instructor. And both of those individuals encouraged me to consider transition at every grade level, but they also encouraged me to consider the importance of transition in reference to living, learning, and working, the importance of developing those independent skills so that when she chose to pursue post-secondary options, and she's been involved, Beth has been involved in all areas of transition, living, learning, and working, in terms of what that might look like and why that's important to have those conversations at each grade level. So making sure that the various members of the IEP team understood and were on the same page with conversations regarding transition were super important for our IEP team to be successful and make sure that we did plan according to what was in the best interest of Beth as she progressed through school. So now you can talk about your experience with transition.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth. I think my experience with transition is a little bit unique in the sense that I was mentored really well as I went through my high school to college transition. I remember very early on being guided by my teacher, the visually impaired, Chad, to take charge of my own IEP meetings. It was actually one of my goals to run my own IEP meetings. So pretty early on, 8th, 9th, 10th grade, I was getting comfortable talking about my disability. And as a blind student going through a public education system and then going into a private Division III college, having that background in self-advocacy was really important for me to be able to connect one-on-one with the Student Support Services office, to be comfortable talking about my disability with my peers and my instructors, so on and so forth. So I don't know if I had a ton of expectations for the transition, because by the time I got to 12th grade into my freshman year of college, I was very used to talking about my needs. Some obviously much more successful endeavors than others. But I think the thing that stands out to me when I think about my transition is the things that I was not necessarily afraid of, but definitely nervous for. I think parents usually think of things like academia, employment. As a student, I thought of the social entities. I was nervous to leave my high school friends behind and find new people to sit with in the dining hall. I was nervous about finding my classes, things of that nature. So looking different than other people, even as we grow out of the middle school fad of, I don't want to be different than anyone else. Being different is still kind of scary and unnerving at times. So I think the transition for me was very focused on, how do I take pride in my disability, but also acknowledge that my disability does make me different? Because I've been blind my entire life, I had some skills in my toolbox, some things to fall back on. But as I went through college, I think my transition really continued until I started using my cane full time, until I started having kind of maybe more off the cuff or flippant conversations about my disability. I really learned to live with it and not live in spite of it. So I think that's a really important stage of transition for all disabled students. In addition to Chad and my mobility instructor, Lori, being really great influences, I do think having that parental surrender, I don't think either of my parents really held me back from things when I was in college. They were bummed that I didn't come home more often, but we don't. I was always encouraged to try new things, both in high school and in college, before, during, and after my transition. I was a high school cheerleader. I was a college wrestling manager. I tutored. I embraced my studies. I was involved in lots and lots of extracurricular activities. So kind of finding ways to incorporate not just academia and employment focuses or independent living focuses, I think is going to be a really important part of transition education moving forward. It really empowers the student to advocate for themselves, which I think is the number one skill that really made my transition as successful as it could have been. That's all I got.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. My name is Young Sobe, the parent of Eugene, a 26-year-old person with autism. My hope for Eugene was no different from any other parent. I hope that one day I would not have to worry about his safety, his inclusion, and his life in the community while he enjoys what he does. Transitioning to adult life was a very tough process for our family. As Eugene grew up, our family's concern about Eugene's adult life became a reality. It seemed too challenging for him to achieve an academically, physically, and emotionally independent life. Moreover, the adult service systems in our community was too complex and not structured to support independent living. I still feel that the transition to adult life for persons with disability and their families is a never-ending process. However, Eugene and I started to see some hopes as he found his first part-time job through a supported employment program. I still remember how Eugene was proud of himself after coming from the interview at the museum where he works now. Even if it is a few hours per week, he found himself belonging to a workplace and the community. His first real job made us think and reevaluate our plans for transportation, financials, and even housing for the future. I believe that more work opportunity for many individuals like my son through school systems in the early stage of a transition planning will greatly help families consider and plan real transition to community living and allow them to move forward even after parents are no longer able to support their children. It takes a whole village to raise a child. I know that it is not an easy thing to do, but I believe we can do it if we start from the local schools and the community.
Thank you, families, for sharing your thoughts and experiences. We so appreciate your insights. I noticed a common theme from our first panel members. No single person can prepare a young adult for life after school. It takes effective collaboration, support, opportunity, and engagement to implement successful transition services. On a similar note, I also heard the word process mentioned several times. Transition doesn't happen in a vacuum at any single point in time. Rather, it is ongoing, and when it begins early, our children are better empowered to develop independence, engage in various opportunities and experiences, and realize their full potential. Elizabeth said something that really stuck with me. She learned to live with her disability instead of in spite of it. That statement exudes strength and independence, and it is something that I hope all of our children can strive for and embrace early in life. Now we're going to hear from a panel of individuals who support children, families, and youth preparing for and going through transition. These individuals represent the scope of professionals who are often involved in transition planning and are critical partners in ensuring positive post-school outcomes for our children. Jacqueline Zissner is a fourth grade general education teacher in Kyrene School District in Phoenix, Arizona. While a general education teacher, Jackie has had children with disabilities in her classroom every year of her career, helping them transition from elementary school to middle school. Thomas Horn is based in Eugene, Oregon, and has previously worked as an elementary principal and secondary principal, as well as a special education administrator. Thomas now works at the district level in curriculum development. Akasha Jenkins has experience serving as an early elementary school special education teacher in Concord, North Carolina. Stacy Duffy serves as a transition and identification specialist and consultant in South Central Wisconsin. And Rocco Gesselman is a vocational counselor in Vermont who provides transition services to high school youth and young adults.
Hi, my name is Jackie Zissler. I'm currently a fourth grade teacher in Phoenix, Arizona. I have had experience with students with disabilities every single year in my teaching career over the last 15 years. And just like with any other student in my class, I think it's essential that I get to know them, who they are, what makes them tick, what are their interests. And then I genuinely have to be interested in what they're talking to me about. I have had to learn about a lot of different topics that I never thought I'd learn about. But I found that once you show you care, once you show you're interested in something that interests any of your students, you've got them. You've got their attention. It's easier to learn their boundaries. It's easier to learn, can I push them a little harder? Can I motivate them with a new fact or something that I've learned to push them to go a little further in anything that they're learning or working on in school? So taking the time to get to know my students has really been one of the things that's made me successful year after year after year. And particularly for my students with disabilities, they need to be seen just as much, if not even a little bit more than everybody in the classroom. They need to feel like a valued member in my classroom. Another way that I am able to connect and help them get through day by day and year to year, especially with their big transitions, is talking about what do you want? What are your expectations? And you have to have that conversation with the student, with all the stakeholders, their parents, any of their extra support teachers, any of their teachers that they've had a really great connection with. It all helps the student. What do we all see? What do we want for the next steps? And in my case, our big transition is elementary school to middle school. You're taking a child who's very safe in an environment where everybody knows them, and you're forcing them into this giant school with hundreds, if not thousands of kids they've never seen before. What is it going to look like for them? I think that's a really important question to ask the parents too. What do you hope for them? Do you want them switching from class to class? Does the kid want to switch from class to class? What supports do they need? I think once you know everybody's vision and what their hopes and dreams are, then you can start working on goals. What is the student's goal? How are they going to survive the first week, the first day, the first year? And then you can go from there. But also, you need a commitment from all of the stakeholders, from the parents, from the teachers, anybody who this child is going to be interacting with regularly. What can they commit to? What can they be sure that they're going to help this child with so they are the most successful? I think after that, you really have to address some of the big challenges that the child is going to face. As I've mentioned before, the safety of being in a smaller school where all their teachers know them. The child's not moving from place to place. That safety net, that sense of security is lifted when you go from elementary school to middle school. And for a lot of kids, middle school to high school, because the high school is usually even bigger. So you have to prepare them for that. They need to know what they're walking into. You can set up a plan with the student and the family to meet at the school. You can talk about it. You can make sure that they have comfortable classmates with them. But all of these things need to be discussed, because I have had a lot of parents in the past who say, what do you think next year is going to look like? They kind of pause and they're like, I don't even know what tomorrow is going to look like. So bringing all these conversations to the forefront and making sure everybody's on the same page is going to help these students be the most successful.
Hi, my name is Thomas Horn, and I live in Eugene, Oregon, and I have been a elementary principal and a high school principal and a special education administrator, and now I work in curriculum, helping develop curriculum for students with disabilities as well as in the entire district. First of all, it's very important to be a deep and patient and good listener. Students and families have individual and unique stories to tell, and it's through listening to these stories that I can really get a sense of what's not only helpful but what's desired. This can also help alleviate the anxiety that families have with regard to transitioning into different phases of education in life. A system-wide focus on equity and inclusivity, and with providing students with opportunities for deeper, more meaningful engagement academically and socially, not only in the world of ideas, but also in the life of the larger community, can really help foster a strong sense of personal identity, an aspiration towards a positive future, increased engagement in a student's community in and out of school, and with the opportunity to learn from real problems and real life experiences, which is incredibly important when you're transitioning into the next phase of your life. Schools have always been a key element of a community's social infrastructure, and it's important to intentionally seek to bring students into the life of the school community where they can contribute their talents and expertise and young wisdom to the social fabric of the community, and not just in the school, but outside of the walls of the school as well. A colleague of mine once said, "Reach up and reach out and do it early." There is support for students and families in the community. Knowing where these supports are is critical. It's very important to work to connect families with outside of the school agencies and resources, as well as what exists in schools. It's also good to reach out to community colleges and universities and programs that foster the acquisition of knowledge to help a student move down a pathway that allows them to utilize their talents and interests and gain a deeper understanding of what and who they desire to be in the world. There's no need to wait until a student's about to graduate from high school to explore the amazing possibilities that are out there. Each individual has natural talents and intellectual aptitudes, and cooperation and teamwork on behalf of a student early in their educational experience is critical. It allows for students and families to actively pursue their dreams and experience a deeper sense of hope and a deeper sense of calm. I believe that the largest obstacles myself and many other educators have faced are philosophical in nature. Of course, there are issues related to navigating systems, but helping other educators and community members recognize and believe in each other's individual potential is fundamentally and critically important. True learning for adults and for students calls on every facet of the human mind, heart, and body. And I absolutely believe that learning should be a fascinating adventure. It should be rigorous, but joyful as well. And encouraging students to actively cultivate their personal identity with the support of the adults that are around them requires a deep and unwavering belief in their ability and their potential.
Hi, my name is Akasha Jenkins, and I am the advocate for scholars. I have spent 10 plus years serving as a teacher for students with disabilities. As we prepare for transition for scholars in the primary sector of their academic career, I think it's so important to involve the scholar in those transition meetings. They are a pivotal stakeholder for all. And I think that they have a voice as well. And we need to start asking them, what is it that they desire? What is it that they need? I also think it's very important to make that scholar aware of their disability and to have those conversations with them so that they can advocate for themselves. We're teaching those skills in the primary foundation. We're laying that foundation. You know, we're telling them, hey, you might do better with a support, like an agenda. And so if they're aware of their needs and they can advocate for those needs. I think it's also pivotal that we talk about the goals that we're setting, and they be goals that are attainable and that are detailed. Not so much as a confusing or something that they can just check off really quickly, but something that they can see themselves achieving, and it inspires them and empowers them to advocate for themselves. If we marry those two things together, we're going to have goals that will help them transition into middle school. And I think that's also important for parents to know that our scholars are capable of doing a lot more than we give them credit for. And although they may be a student with a disability, we need to set goals that are attainable for them, their scholar, and them as a family. And if you may think it's too big, it's really not. We talk about the special education system being tailored, and sometimes we just need to maintenance that goal. We can do things that we don't erase goals completely. We modify the goals so that they can still reach it. And I think if we start talking like that in the primary area of their academic career, we'll see a lot more progress down the line because they were empowered very young, and we set the bar. There was an expectation for them to succeed and to know what they needed, and that will create a consistent flow for them to be advocates. I think the biggest challenge that I see being an educator is having everyone on the same page. There's so many stakeholders involved, and everyone really wants the best interest for that scholar. And so just being able to communicate clearly the expectation and understanding that there will be speed bumps along the way, but we as a team can come together and really advocate for that scholar to help them meet their goals. And I think that's very important. If we can consistently communicate with one another, we can see success in those transitions. I also think it's important that we educate each other, that we educate those that do not have students with disabilities, so that they are aware that our scholars are capable of so much more than just being boxed in. And the more that they see them out and achieving their goals, we're creating a new norm. And I think that's very important as well. And I think that's it. Thank you.
In my role as a transition specialist and consultant, I provide support to school districts around transition planning, inclusionary practices, and removing barriers to ensure students with disabilities have access and engagement with not only grade and age level curriculum, but also with career and work-based learning experiences. We know inclusion to be one of the top predictors for post-secondary success in the areas of career, post-secondary education, and independent living. So to me, meaningful inclusion is key for eliciting and supporting high expectations for students with disabilities. There are many aspects to transition which can feel overwhelming for students and their families. So the earlier that transition conversations and planning can start, the better. By starting those transition conversations and planning at the elementary level, it provides more opportunities for students and their families to learn about and connect with transition resources and transition partners. So when it comes time to make those decisions around transition, they feel empowered and confident to do so. It's also important to focus on that collaboration between transition partners, because we know that is key for improving post-secondary outcomes for students with disabilities. This collaboration includes the student, their families, the IEP team, the district's career readiness team, outside agencies, service providers, post-secondary partners, community connections, and many other resources. It's also really important to provide opportunities for families to connect with each other, which can be done through local, regional, and statewide national supports. It's also important to remember that as we are providing these learning opportunities for students and their families around transition, we need to ensure that the resources are accessible for all, with considerations around language, assistive technology, and other needs or considerations that they may have. One challenge I have faced was that families were getting the transition information during their 11th or 12th grade years, which rightfully so felt very overwhelming and resulted in them not feeling confident or informed enough to make those big post-secondary transition plans and decisions. So the solution we came up with is that I started working with school districts to develop a transition plan to incorporate transition planning at each grade level to ensure by the time those decisions needed to be made, students and families felt confident to do so. And it's important to note that we started with those plans at the elementary level. Another challenge that I have faced is that because transition planning has so many facets depending on the individualized needs of the student, how do you get the information to students, to families, and IEP teams in an effective manner? So this led me to develop a transition website, which really serves as one location where students, families, and IEP teams know that they can go to find that information, and then they can learn and process it at their own rate versus receiving it all at one time. In this website, we'd find things such as family engagement and connections, legal rights, outside agencies, service providers, employment, partners in post-secondary education, and many other resources. Again, it was really helpful for families to be able to access and learn that information on their own time and be able to process it versus receiving it all in one at one meeting or at one event. So they really appreciated that opportunity. From my perspective, early transition planning and inclusionary practices are vital to ensure students are prepared with the knowledge, skills, and supports they need to be successful in meeting their post-secondary goals.
Hello, I'm Rocco Gieselman. I'm a vocational counselor in Vermont, working with high school youth and young adults. I do a lot of career assessments and long-term goal setting with high school students. While the framework of a dream job can be problematic, I strive to help youth explore the exact careers that interest them, regardless of how niche or competitive they are. My role on the team is to empower youth to imagine the future of their wildest dreams and then find concrete next steps to help them prepare for that journey. Some examples of those next steps might be researching the education or training requirements. It might be doing a job shadow or paid work experience with a local employer related to their career of interest, all with the goal of helping them gather the information they need in order to make an informed decision about what they want to do with life after high school. I really appreciated Elizabeth's comment about how important it was for her to lead her IEP meetings. Young adults need to be able to advocate for themselves at work, in post-secondary education, and in their social lives. Scaffolding self-advocacy instruction into IEP meetings is an excellent way to help youth find their voice and will result in more meaningful transition goals. This experience also helps families transition from the kind of advocacy they may have needed to use in elementary or middle school and shift to centering the student's direct input. I've also noticed that youth who have strong self-advocacy skills tend to get more out of services. They help us redirect when services aren't meeting their needs, and they're less afraid to ask for creative solutions. This level of collaboration is much harder to achieve if the youth doesn't have a sense of what their needs are or what strategies have been helpful to them in the past. I support youth in a relatively rural part of Vermont, and transportation is a consistent challenge. Students often have more access to transportation while they're in high school through their school district, but might not be able to maintain their job after graduation. The increase in online college and training programs has been a huge help, but there aren't many remote jobs that a recent high school graduate would be a competitive applicant for. So when we're thinking about employment goals, we often have to think outside of the house. It can sometimes feel like transportation planning is an afterthought for transition teams, but it can absolutely derail a youth goal if it isn't taken into account as those initial employment goals are being set. Even if a youth has their driver's license, it can be expensive for families to provide them access to a car and add them to their car insurance. Families need to be included in every level of transportation planning because it could impact them in ways the rest of the transition team might not be aware of. Similarly, families might have access to a resource that, when leveraged with a vocational rehabilitation, developmental services, or some other agency's resource, suddenly makes a transportation plan sustainable.
Thank you, thank you, thank you to our practitioners for sharing your thoughts and your experiences. I heard a lot of thoughtful insights and consistent themes when each of you were speaking. I consistently heard about making personal connections with students, which we know is critical, committing to consistent communication, and working with the student, family, teachers, and other professionals, including our partners at VR, to identify the student skills and interests that are all of this is very critical to successful transition planning. So thank you so much. Also heard that when transition planning discussions wait until the student's 11th grade year, they and their family are very much overwhelmed and underprepared to engage in those important conversations. But when those conversations begin at the elementary level, families feel a lot more informed and empowered to fully participate in the transition planning process, take advantage of the resources and all of the opportunities that are available to them. Tom mentioned a phrase he got from a colleague about reach up, reach out, and do it early. And I really like that phrase. It summarizes one of the basic foundations of this initiative, and you are absolutely going to be hearing that again soon. Even though we have talked a lot about starting early, what we're also talking about simultaneously is making the process seamless, right? And so there's a lot that plays into that. And there's a whole lot more that I would love to highlight, but I need to turn now to our final panel that's going to be speaking about collaborations and systems change to help support families and practitioners to achieve the high expectations, engagement, and empowerment that will help realize the outcomes that we all want for our students. So I want to introduce our colleagues from the beautiful state of Maine that are here to speak with us about the need for systems change. And so I want to introduce Erin Frazier, who's the State Director of Special Services for Birth to 22 at the Office of Special Services and Inclusive Education for the Maine Department of Education, and Dr. Libby Stone Sterling, who is the Director of the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation at the Maine Department of Labor. All right, ladies, so let's jump right into it without any delay, because there are a number of things that I want to make sure that we absolutely get to. Can you describe for me the partnership between Voc Rehab and special education, how it developed in your state, and what you think is the essential ingredient for collaboration?
Well, thank you for having us. It's been a pleasure listening to your panelists, and a lot of what we heard today was resonating for me. As a former practitioner, one of the things that was really helpful for me in I've been a fan of transition since I started in education. I started in elementary school, and I noticed early on that if kids weren't involved in decision-making around what they were doing, they just weren't engaging in their plans or their IEPs or their progress or their program the way I wanted them to. So I've been a fan of transition from a really early age. I'm super passionate about it. And as a practitioner and in special education, certainly listening to the families speak and their children speak about what's important to them resonated with me. Leo speaking about his dreams that he has and his parents encouraging that, and Elizabeth talking about taking over her plan and advocating for herself. Those are things that we really draw on in Maine. In Maine early on, as a practitioner, I partnered with Voc Rehab when I was in a school, and it was imperative because I saw it as the other side of what I was doing, in terms of the educational piece, the vocational piece, and beyond that, belonging to community. I felt like all of those things were intertwined. So I was connected to this organization, and when I came to the state, I continued this partnership with VR. And noticed that we had a lot to work with. We have a similar passion around this topic, and getting all of our students who are rising up in the school system ready and prepared. We use stakeholder input. We have a large stakeholder input, especially for parents and families and students who have already left school, who can tell us what their experience was like and how we need to support them in a different way. In Maine, we have a transition specialist on my team who's really, really dedicated to having authentic student voice, and has established a panel of students in school and in beyond school to help us develop an authentic, engaging transition work, which is really exciting for us. And Libby, I'll have you talk about all of the things we're doing, adding on to that.
Well, I think you can see, and thank you again, Dr. Williams, for having us join this panel today. What an exciting opportunity it was to listen to families and providers. And I think in Maine, one of the pieces that has been so very successful is that shared passion that we have. And we also really work very hard to convey that out to the field, to support the field with the shared vocabulary, shared beliefs, and also funding a lot of shared projects. And I think that has helped us, whether it's benefits counseling or whether it's supporting employment support services in the community, working together and showing agencies and our schools and our partners and families that we're working together, I think makes things go a long way.
Thank you for that. So I just wanted to reflect on a couple of things in case someone missed it. A couple of key ingredients that you both mentioned: stakeholder input, communication, shared passion, and funding shared projects. The funding of the shared projects, that is not a small thing. That is monumental that you've been able to put that together in your partnership, which I'm sure you've only been able to do after you have built the relationships and moved forward with that true systems change. So thank you for that. Let's see. How about, I'm sure you encountered barriers in trying to collaborate. And so can you talk a little bit about what those barriers were?
I can say that, going off of what Rocco said in their experience, Maine has a lot of the same unique challenges that Vermont does with rural areas where we have lack of infrastructure, we have lack of transportation, we have lack of services. Certainly, we have a very strong priority of equity and access in Maine. And so we're leveraging some of the things that happened post-pandemic to try to get more resources in terms of professional development and learning out to places that are very remote. So we definitely have that aspect of challenges in a state that has some very rural areas. We also took advantage of infrastructure in terms of internet capacity and building those things during the pandemic that we're able to kind of support our systems work a little bit more strongly. There's still work to go in terms of that. And then Libby, if you want to speak to the other big challenge that we're having around staffing.
Yeah, so certainly like many other states, we've seen a lot of turnover coming out of the pandemic, and we're doing a lot of re-education of staff and of providers. And I think the fact that we're working so closely together has made that go much smoother. But we're also looking at opportunities. We talked about the issue of transportation. We've really embraced doing many more things virtually and offering that out so that if you're living in a super remote area of the state, you still have some equity of access through some of the services that we're able to provide. And that has been really exciting to see. I know in VR, we're loaning out Chromebooks and hotspots and other ways to increase access so that we can really address that need that we've heard. And then, of course, one of our most exciting initiatives that we've started recently has been around taking students on college bus fare. So in the summertime, having a coach bus of students, and this has really been in partnership with schools and families, and taking students out to see colleges. And we realize that a lot of students in rural states may not have had that opportunity. Families may not have had the opportunity to take students on college tours. And when we think about raising expectations, that is so very key to get young people out and seeing what's possible for them after high school.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Can either one of you talk about to what extent does, say, financial support for the services determine success? Can you dig a little bit into that?
In terms of the financial support for initiatives that we have across the state, well, certainly it's a big initiative. Our whole state is really looking at transition as a priority. And the interesting thing about Maine is that birth to 22, the services are all under the Department of Education, which really looks at that transition over time. So again, I think that we have a feeling like investment now is going to support the state economically, and also in terms of community and belonging, and making sure that people have the support they have to be active and engaged members of communities. Really, we're just talking about variability in the population, and we want everyone to feel like they have, as Thomas Horn said, natural talents. That is what everyone possesses. So we have to invest now in the educational and vocational training so that the state can promote these individuals who have variable learning styles and make sure that they're successful in their communities. So we're lucky, I think, that we have a nice level of support for that across the legislature, across we have really good, strong parent advocacy groups, both in schools and in children who've left the school system. So we're really focusing on that right now, and the transition to what happens after children leave school and how can they access the supports we need. Someone else, I can't remember who, was talking about Stacy Duffy, I think, around the website and the hub of transition services. That's something that we're collaborating on and bringing all the state agencies together to make sure that the support is in one place and that it's highly accessible. So yes, we definitely have a commitment to this, and we see it as the investment in our communities and in the future of the economy of Maine, frankly.
And to that point, I would just like to add briefly, Maine is an employment first state, and we've partnered together to really make that a priority, as well as we are a state that has eliminated sub-minimum wage for people with disabilities. And I think those supports have really helped us be able to move forward with a lot of the initiatives that we're interested in around competitive integrated employment and moving people with disabilities in that direction, and especially embracing career pathways and apprenticeship and all different new opportunities that we're seeing develop that really rely on us working across systems to make them successful.
That's very exciting. You mentioned, Erin, having everything in one place. It sounds like a small thing, but that's huge, given the number of stakeholders that I'm sure that you have, and that they don't have to go to a million different places to find one piece of information. So everybody can go to one place and find the information that they need. It's small, but it's got to be extremely helpful and efficient. And you also mentioned, Libby, eliminating sub-minimum wage. I can't tell you how happy that makes me. We are still fighting that fight, but in many places, but that's also a huge step forward. In terms of the funding mechanisms for what happens in Maine, ladies, for the services, does that look like fee for service? Is it contract? Is it grant? What exactly does that look like in Maine?
So there's multiple pathways. We do access, and we do access a lot of grant money. We access our federal funds for special education. We access state funds as well. So, and then we have legislative initiatives that provide funding for, especially looking at, that time outside of school when someone might not be potentially going to a university or college or a post-secondary experience, but what then is what are they going to be participating in terms of employment. So I would say we use everything and anything that we can find. And Libby, I don't know if you have additional.
Well, I think the pre-employment transition services, that framework has been so important because it really has set kind of that expectation that schools and VR are working together, and we are seeing some real differences as a result. But to your point, Erin, I think we're seeing that being delivered. Some fee for service, some is contract, some are in-house initiatives that we're partnering together between the departments to deliver. So we're trying to be flexible and really be responsive to the needs of schools and to the young people that we're serving.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Let's move to the success of your partnership in Maine. How do you think all of the partners ensure long-term success for the partnership and for the youth and young adults?
So we definitely are goal setters here. We have different activities that we're monitoring. We're looking at data closely. We're making sure that this just isn't a conversation that we keep having, but we're looking at meaningful ways to measure the progress that we're making. And that's really how we connect if what we're doing is achieving great results. I know that in the position that we created, we have a very dynamic person who is also really excited about transition, connecting all different levels of state agencies to just understand what each of us is doing and the role we play in the full picture of supporting an individual through their life that potentially has a disability. So really making meaningful progress is around accountability and making sure that we have clear expectations and then looking at data to make sure that those things are happening. Again, we don't want to just sit around and talk about this. We want to be able to prove that what we're doing is really effective and working. So we're looking chronically, constantly at trying to measure those successes and look at, we do take feedback from our student. We have an executive student transition committee that has members that are in school down to middle school and out of school. We are using that as a, reviewing things that we're doing with transition in terms of making sure that it's something that's relevant and engaging for these kids. Again, if kids don't own their plans, then they have very little investment and they don't really understand why it is that we're having this conversation. So that's really important. I don't know, Libby, if there's anything you wanted to add to that, but we kind of want to prove what we're doing is accurately happening.
Well, and I think we see it reflected in lots of different ways. This happens to be coincidentally the third meeting that Erin and I are in together today. And I think keeping those lines of communication open, both casually as well as formally, I think helps to make a difference, because if things are going on, we're hearing about that. We're sharing that information. But it is also sharing the data. When I think about what's in our state plan for vocational rehabilitation, what's in our memorandum of understanding with the Department of Education, what are the things that are helping us to support those structures? So yes, we have a great working relationship together, but if there are other people sitting in our seats, we want those good work to continue. We don't want it to be just dependent on the two of us or others in our departments.
Thank you so much. I just wrote a couple notes because a lot of that really resonated with me, that there's a feedback loop and that you are collecting data. So this goes beyond just having the conversation, and having the conversation alone is significant. I don't want to downplay that at all, but it can't just be the conversation, because without data, we have no idea if what we're doing is working or not. And without data, literally all we have are our opinions, and that's it. And that's not enough. And also something that has been on my mind in the 18 months since I've been here at the department is that we need to make sure that our work becomes systemic, and it's not based on anyone's great personality or their desire to, get along with any other person in particular. That, if you ladies literally walked away tomorrow and hit the lotto and decided that you were moving on, you have systems and processes in place so that things will continue. And it wasn't just based on you sitting in the seat where you are right now. That is critical to true systems change, that it doesn't rely on one individual person. So thank you for that. That's critical. Another question I have for you: how do you, and I can see where sometimes this might be a little dicey, and you had to get to a good spot to have this conversation. How do you hold each other accountable for success?
I think that both Libby and I are, wanting to focus on this goal to the point where it's, it creates an environment of psychological safety where we can provide input and feedback for one another. That's really critical to the mission versus, an ego or, I have to be right in my job. So I think that level of trust and the amount of time that she and I have worked together have really made that very apparent, and it helps us have really challenging conversations, because this work it's meaningful, but people have a lot of strong emotions about it. It's their children. There's nothing more important than that, and the fact that their children are doing well. So that's something that I think that we rely on. We extend that to our other state agency partners who are also being brought into this work, to just make sure that we're focused on the goal for these children, to the point where we can have these challenging conversations when things aren't, if we pilot something and it's not going well, or if we're having staffing challenges and we need to talk about that, and workarounds or things that we can do to problem solve. So I think it's a critical piece in this work, is to really just maintain that focus and make it more about that mission than about any personal agenda or need to, be right, I guess.
We have transition staff who are out in the field and in schools or around the state. And sometimes there might be something that isn't going as smoothly with the school as it could be. And we really expect and hope that the schools or if it's the transition specialist that Erin spoke about or others, that they'll bring that information back to us, that, you know, that we will really hear that, even if it's information that we might think, oh, I'd rather not hear this, but it's really critical to being accountable to each other. And likewise, if we hear things or there's something that's happening, you know, in a school that we're wondering about, we're keeping that, you know, conversation going in a way that isn't, you know, isn't something that is at all punitive or we're trying to gut you on anything, but it's really about how do we make sure we're all moving towards that shared goal. And since we have such a strong commitment to transition, it's very easy to leave egos behind and focus on that goal.
Thank you for that. It sounds to me like what you're saying is that you're intentional, that you are honest, that you make it a point to communicate, and you don't shy away from anything that could be a tough conversation. And I really applaud you for that and appreciate that, and being honest enough to share that in this forum, because there are other places where they either have developed the relationships that you have or they're looking to do so. And so to talk through some of the mechanics of what that looks like and how it works is extremely important. So I want to thank you for that. We have a ton of questions coming in. And there are one or two that I want to make sure I get to that I think are representative of a lot of the questions that were dropped in. One is that someone dropped in, we heard in your intro that this initiative involves all of us, but can you help those of us in early childhood or Part C, infant and toddler services, understand how we fit into secondary transition? Erin, do you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, sure. Part C is my favorite. I love it. It's all my favorite. But Part C is the entry into our understanding of how we can support a lot of different individuals and particularly focusing on their family. And there's a very, very important transition, as anyone with an infant or toddler in Part C knows, that occurs at the third birthday. And that's really where our focus is in terms of helping families try to understand the journey that will be different, that starts at the 3-year age, at the 3-year birthday. So talking about, you know, what the difference is between free, appropriate public education versus early intervention, and helping parents especially understand that this is supported, that we have information. One of your parents spoke about how the education that she, and I actually was taking notes during that segment because I thought that's really the parent training that we provide people in terms of what the expectations are and how it might be different between Part C and Part B in special education. Is really important. It's a critical transition. We also have a transition from preschool to kindergarten in Maine. And so we focus on those transitions, and our work is trying to help families understand what access and supports and rights they have. We have a really lovely warm call in our dispute resolution team for parents who have questions about what their rights are, because again, a lot of the information that parents get is very overwhelming if they haven't been in an educator or understand the rules and laws. And so we have a lot of supports and mechanisms to try to help parents understand what this journey will be like, and specifically to have optimism and hope and all of the great things. We're really working to support inclusion in Maine. Someone again said that inclusion is the foundation for how we can get communities that are inclusive after school ends. So those kinds of things are how we support our Part C parents in terms of trying to understand how they're going to progress and all the support they can get, their rights and what to expect, and also to dream big and have high expectations. Parent advocates are they are so important in everything, because they are the reason we have these high expectations. And so we work really closely with our Maine Parent Federation, our Parent Technical Training Institute, and we just try to collaborate at every phase from birth to 22 to make sure that people have the resources and information they need.
Perfect. Thank you. And another question that came in that I think is kind of critical, that Libby, I think is in your wheelhouse, is what role can vocational rehabilitation play in supporting students with disabilities as they transition from secondary education to post-secondary education or a career? How and when do I engage with the Voc Rehab Agency?
Well, I think that's the piece that's so exciting about the pre-employment transition services. It's really opened up that opportunity to start earlier, at age 14 and beginning with those experiences. And we heard through all of the young people and families the importance of starting early, but also the importance of having those early experiences. So it's not just that you had one particular experience, but you've had many experiences to build on, and you can really see the difference. And for us, we have been really, really committed to making sure that young people are having a paid work experience before high school graduation, because we know the importance and what it tells us in the research about that. And but also the self-advocacy, we heard that loud and clear coming through all of the presenters, that young people need to have those opportunities to build those skills. And so we're really thinking differently maybe than we did in the past in vocational rehabilitation about building in those opportunities through either structured programs, as we have here in Maine. We have a couple of really exciting programs that our Division for the Blind has launched around about help really targeting building that self-advocacy and skills, but really thinking about how we can make sure that we're starting early, engaging early. And so there is time. So there is time to try out these things and have those experiences. And then whether it's going on the college bus tours that I mentioned earlier, or we have some wonderful college prep programs that we offer in the summertime for students, really thinking about how they can get the extra supports or additional resources in place so that they can be successful in those next steps, whether it's employment or post-secondary education and training.
Perfect. Well, ladies, I wrote down a couple of things, but I honestly want to thank you for your role in this, because I think that it's helpful when we see what a successful system looks like. And this is critical to what we're doing. It is great for us to develop resources for our parents, for our students, for our families. But what we want is for the system to function well, independent of all of that. And when that happens, then we'll know that we are really onto something. So I want to thank you for being here just to illustrate what that successful partnership looks like. And I'm sure we'll be talking to you some more in the future.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us. We love this. We love this topic.
Thank you. So for all of my participants, as I wrap up today, what I want to do is extend my sincere and honest gratitude to all of my colleagues, there are many, who are always more than ready to lend their support in making this event and all the future events that we're going to do a success. It is literally not possible to list the names of all of them. There are many. So a big, personal, honest, heartfelt thanks to everyone who contributed toward this event. It wouldn't have been possible without you. I also want to thank our colleagues at the American Institutes for Research for their tremendous support in getting this initiative off the ground, as well as for hosting this event today. We could not have done it without you. I especially want to thank our panelists, all of the panelists, for participating in this important discussion and for sharing their personal stories and experiences in secondary transition and post-secondary outcomes. Today absolutely would not have been possible without you. And finally, I want to thank each and every one of you that's on here right now for making time to join us today to kick off this extremely important conversation. We know that when we truly work together, we are poised to see our students reach new heights in and outside of the classroom, in their careers, in their enriched lives and communities, honestly making a positive difference in the world for many generations to come. So we hope to see you again at future events. This is the first event, not the last one. There are going to be several more throughout the remainder of 2023. And while I cannot announce all of them right this second, I want to encourage you to regularly visit our website, which is going to be dropped into the chat if it hasn't already. So visit regularly because there's going to be continuous updates dropped in there. Information on events, resources, a link to OSEP's transition guide, information from RSA. And so go there early and go there often. So again, I want to thank you not only for joining us today, but for your continued roles as stewards of support and champions of excellence for our students and the bright futures they deserve, because I know that together we can increase what we expect, how we engage, and how we empower our students and our families to ensure successful transitions for all. And in case you happen to miss it, this event was recorded. It will be on the website and you will also be getting a link to it. So in case you missed any part of it or you decide you want to share it, feel free to do that. This is open to everyone. We want this to be successful to improve the outcomes for our students. So thank you very much and have a great day.